Podsmashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-Bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer.
Nice.
We are your hosts,
Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games, usually over a beer.
That's
and tonight,
right.
this week, is Father's Day week / The Last of Us Part 2 release week, and we thought it would be fantastic to talk about fatherhood in
Happy
video
Father's
games.
Day, all you dads out there. And happy Father's Day to you, Termite.
And happy Father's Day to you as well. How about that?
Yep, so we'll be breaking down fatherhood, talking about who we think some of the best dads in games are, and just talk about fatherhood in general, celebrate that this week. We're gaming goes to grab a beer, so we are drinking beers today, and we'll talk about that in a second. First, we want to address a situation that, because we record ahead of time, we have not been able to address in anything other than a blog post, but we did want to address it on the air. We wanted to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, the current state of our country and protests and rioting, and, of course, the loss of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. So, yes, we want to address that. Termite, do you want to start?
Sure. So George Floyd was murdered in cold blood in broad daylight by a horrible member of the Minneapolis Police Department. And it was captured completely on tape. The officer's knee was on the back of George Floyd's neck while he was screaming in pain, agony, and telling him he couldn't breathe for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And after this gruesome video, he was announced dead. I don't think he died in the video, but that's regardless of the point. As a result, we have, as a country, rightfully paid attention and rightfully began protesting and speaking out. And I'm saying we, but Black people and Black Lives Matter and Black Americans specifically have been doing this forever, right?
Yeah.
And this is the one that took. This was
right. In the middle of a global pandemic. Everyone's already kind of, at the top of their frustrations and their limits, and this is kind of the tipping point. But it is right that it is. It is right that we let this boil over in a lot of ways. And it's not right to loot. It's not right to take advantage of the situation to hurt or harm others. But the fact that people are willing to stand up and protest this, even at the cost of their own safety, because of the overzealousness of the police, it is right that is going on. So, again, we at 80-Bit Podsmash, Penguin and Termite, we tend to try to avoid taking, one side or the other in political situations. Obviously, our biases come through at various points, but we do try to remain politically neutral because we're not a political podcast. We're a video game podcast. But this is a circumstance where we both very strongly feel that we have to take a side. And so we are coming out in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And beyond coming out in support right now, we are just going to step back and let the Black voices do their thing, and we will talk about video games, what we do know, but we do, I think that's fair to say we both support that movement. Yes, and the changes that they wish to bring about.
And we addressed the issue immediately with a blog post. The week that this happened, we decided not to stream on Twitch, despite the fact that it's a tiny itty-bitty stream. And we don't get a lot of people in. We still just felt it was inappropriate to even think of that right now, or even post it in our Discord or anywhere else on social media that we were streaming. So we just we have a blog post with our thoughts more about this, how we've reacted to it. But we're angry. We're still mad. We're still angry. And we are white, privileged, middle-aged, median income kids whose lives have been nothing but propped up and to gain no fault of our own other than the fact that we're white. And it's got to change. It's got to stop. And the fact that there's angry riots, I don't even care about the loots and the stealing. That doesn't matter. That's just noise. The fact that that's happening, I could not care less. We have insurance for that. That's stuff. That's people. That's not people. I'm sorry. That's things that can be replaced. And we have 200 plus years of 400 years, 1776 on, even before that. We have 400 years of an American culture that has been centered and built on the backs of suffering, oppressed Black Americans, and it has to stop. Our entire system is built around it, so it makes me furious. My head is starting to swell as I'm talking about this. I cannot believe, it's crazy. So, yes, we're taking a step back to let more important voices be heard, and in doing so, I am self-reflecting in what I can be doing, acknowledging my own biases, and figuring out what my family and I, how we can change our way of thinking forever. A more permanent change needs to happen. And if I can do that at an individual level, maybe I can affect some of the community around me. And that's kind of where I'm trying to, I hate the term, but like leverage my privilege.
Yeah.
But also I want to like risk something here. Like I want to sacrifice and lose a part of my privilege to kind of like bring on that pain. Like it's empathy, right? That's the core of what empathy is. Like I'm so angry and I feel so in this, even though I am white and privileged, that I don't mind taking a risk or stepping out and doing something or saying something. So I'm so fired up that I've been like reacting on Facebook. I don't know if you see what I do on Facebook or not, but I have been like exploding everywhere.
Yeah.
I've been all over Facebook and
I've been way more active. Yeah, I've been way more active than I normally am on social media as well regarding this.
Like I'm
this
just
topic.
calling out all of the excuses. I'm calling out everyone trying to highlight all the looting and stuff. Like it's completely missing the point. And I just keep reiterating, say his name, George Floyd, say his name, Black Lives Matter, and continue to acknowledge and push this message forward that Black people have been oppressed and they are angry and they are not heard. And we need to lift their voices up. We need to amplify their voices in our own platforms and do everything we can for them.
Yeah. And we're willing to lose listeners on this. You know what I mean? Like we wouldn't be saying this if we weren't willing to lose listeners. So we understand on some level if you are alienated by this particular 5-minute spiel. And if you decide to stop listening to us, we get it, but we're willing to take that risk if that makes sense because this is important to us. So I don't want to.
Let's talk about some quick actions that we're taking.
Yes, that's what I wanted to get to. I want to talk about. I want to talk about actions we're taking and actions we encourage you to take as well. So if you are equally fired up about this, if you are inspired about this particular problem, then we do encourage you to take action. I'll let Termite talk about ways you can do that.
Yeah, so I'm actually following the lead. Everything's changing every single day, and I'm learning every day. So this is going to it could appear as short-sighted, or I'm not doing enough, or shallow. Believe me, it's a process. Every single day I have new ideas. I'm just flooded with stuff to do and think of. I've sought out a documentary on Netflix that I've been recommended by someone called 13th. And it is a documentary that maps out the history of America and its criminal justice system and how it has been stacked against Black people since slavery through the civil rights movements in the 60s, all the way through Nixon's presidency, Reagan's presidency with the war on drugs. And the gist of it, just to give you a little taste, is at the very beginning, we had slavery that was abolished. The South's economy was wrecked. They needed to rebuild. They couldn't, so they found a loophole. It's written in the 13th Amendment to allow imprisonment to give them their free labor. So they have demonized and attacked Black males to get them into prison systems so they could exploit them for free labor. This happened. I cannot, I'm just saying it out loud. Like I can't even imagine like political things making these decisions. But anyway, this documentary, I'm talking quickly because I want to get through this without taking up too much of your time. Please go check out. It's this documentary called 13th. In addition to that, now going back to what I originally started with, there is a podcast company that I follow religiously called Kinda Funny. And they have a podcast every day, Kinda Funny Games Daily, and it's where I get most of my daily video game news. It's a great synopsis. They run through the daily news. Well, there is one host on the show who's Black, and the CEO and founder, one of the founders of the four of them, Greg Miller, decided I'm going to let this guy, his name is Blessing, I'm going to let him host every single show this week. And we're going to have nothing but Black voices on our show. And we're canceling every other show that we do because they have like 6 different shows. They canceled everything except for Kinda Funny Games Daily. They're bringing in Black voice guests from other Black podcasts in the gaming industry. And every day they're addressing this issue with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and they're talking it. It has been absolutely incredible. Just that small like change in my daily routine to listen to a Black person more than I normally would is already affected so much. So I encourage you guys to listen to some podcasts from voices that are Black. And one of them that I'm going to start listening to is called Married to the Game. It's a gaming podcast put on by 9-to-5ers like us that are Black. And they're a family-friendly video game podcast. I haven't listened to them yet, but it was one of the recommendations from the guest on that show. And I will let you, Penguin, talk about what your wife is doing and the thing that we're going to be a part of as well, to try the goal of this is to be influenced by Black voices more than we already are. So I work for a company that's mostly white. I go to a church that's 100% white, and my family's white. So where am I going to get any influence or any perspective or like any culture for Black people, and I want to hear what they have to say. So this is a way that I'm changing my routine so that I can have a more permanent influence and perspective of Black Americans.
Yep.
So go ahead.
My wife started essentially a book club on Facebook, and the book they're going through the book we will be going through. I've been told under no certain terms that I am going to be participating in this, but it's called I need to pull it up. And
How to be Anti-Racist.
How to be Anti-Racist. Do you have it up in front of you with the author?
I don't know who the author is.
It's called How to be Anti-Racist. My internet's failing me right now, but it is it's a book basically talking about how it's not enough anymore to just be not racist. To say I'm not racist, I'm neutral towards race. That's not enough anymore. And it has never been enough. You have to, the ethical response is to say, if you truly believe that racism is bad, you have to say, I am anti-racist. I am anti-racism. So that the book walks through what it looks like to be anti-racist. And so we're going to be working through and discussing that. In addition to that, I would encourage you to take actions such as, beyond just educating yourself and contemplating, meditating on these things. We'd encourage you to consider protesting, consider donating. If you are passionate about these things, then call your representatives, talk to your representatives, let it influence the way you vote, because it touches everything. There are pretty much there's not really any political issue that is not touched in some way. The economy is touched by it. Social issues, most of them are touched by this issue as well. So educate yourself, see how it does, and then let those things inform the way you vote and the way that you engage with your representatives, because change needs to happen. And even if you're not passionate necessarily about the race thing, you should be. But if you're not, just consider the way that the police have been acting through all this. And please pay attention, because what keeps echoing through my head goes all the way back to the Hong Kong thing. And there was a meme that was going around that was basically just a picture of some spray paint in Hong Kong that said, "Listen to Hong Kong today, or be Hong Kong tomorrow." And that's, that echoes with us now. Today it's Black people, but tomorrow it might be Democrats. The next day it might be libertarians. You know what I mean? It's going to be systems of power just perpetuate their power unless they're stood up against. So take your power back, America. And So anyways, we are going to get derailed if we continue to talk about that. I did want to talk a little bit about news beyond, including how this protest and the Black Lives Matter movement has affected the gaming industry, because it has rightly affected the gaming industry in some pretty interesting and potent ways. So there's a little bit of news from that. I'm
going to start of that conversation really fast with two big highlights. There's a lot of action coming out of the gaming industry. Some of it a little more shallow, some of it not. But some of the ones that were the most impactful was Sony postponing their massive PlayStation 5 unveiling with their gameplay showcase, or their games showcase. It's been pushed a week. So they said, we're taking a step back. We're going to let more important voices be heard. Fantastic. Another thing that happened that really shows
they got criticized. They got criticized for that. So that shows how impactful it was. People were like, "My video games, how dare you? We've been waiting forever for information." And they're like, "Look, there's more important things going on." I didn't expect them to do it, quite frankly. I told you, I think my words to you were, as much as it pains me to say, the world doesn't revolve around America, and Sony is a Japanese company, but they proved me wrong.
Right.
And I found out later they have 30% of their market share is in the United States. So that's
that's true.
That is a motivating factor. We want to believe that Sony did this entirely out of the altruistic goodness of their heart, and that is not true. They did it calculated. They weighed the calculated risk and said, "Hey, look, we stand to lose a lot of money and get some bad press if we don't push this back." So good on them. Anyways, you know what I mean? No matter what their motivations are, it's probably a mixture of those two things. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of altruism in there. There's a little bit of financial. It was still the right call, no matter what way no matter how you skin that cat. It was the right call. Yeah,
definitely a good thing. And then Rockstar Games tweeted today, "Black Lives Matter. To honor the legacy of George Floyd, today from 2 to 4, we will be shutting down access to our online games, Grand Theft Auto Online and Red Dead Online." That is crazy awesome, because 2 to 4 p.m. today was the memorial service and funeral for George Floyd, and they didn't want to interfere with that. So if you're just if you somehow have no idea what's going on and you decide, I'm just going to play my games, and you log into GTA Online which you've been doing forever and spending tons of money in, this hypothetical person, they suddenly log in and they're met with a message saying, we're not online because of something exponentially more important than this game right now. You should go look at that. Like, how obstructive is that? It's amazing. So kudos to Rockstar for doing that. And apparently it was extended to some of their 2K, because Rockstar's kind of in that 2K umbrella, like other 2K games, which are sports games and stuff.
Borderlands.
All shut down.
Borderlands is pushing back the content they were going to be releasing this week as well. So it's not. So it was supposed to come out today, and the new Takedown was supposed to come out today, and they pushed that back. Again, all of these things you have to consider. They are calculated as well. But then you have the other end of the spectrum where this kind of thing, if you don't calculate enough risk, then you're going to get backlash in the other end of the spectrum. So you see Blizzard, for example, Activision Blizzard, they came out and tweeted something in support of Black Lives Matter, and it bit them in the butt because people rightly pointed out the hypocrisy of them making a statement in support of the United States protests when they came down so hard on someone protesting for Hong Kong. So it was, so that bit them in the butt. I've seen other companies, not necessarily video game companies, but other companies that either they'll tweet, but they won't mention Black Lives or George Floyd at all. And it's like, what are you even doing? You're not calculating enough risk at this point. You're not putting enough skin in the game. And now you're just being shown to be vapid and hypocritical and trying to so clearly win public support when you're not willing to also risk derisive derision for your
And I did a quick Google search trying to figure like a list of all the companies that have done stuff, and I can't find one that's like of any value. But there are some companies that are matching donations to various. You can donate to the Black Lives Matter movement itself. You can donate to some of the bail funds to get criminals out of the justice system so they can get out of jail and start getting their life back on track. Right. And so there's all these different things to donate to, and there are video game companies that are matching those. They even got Nintendo to speak. That in and of itself is crazy. When has Nintendo ever spoken about any political or protest issue ever, especially something in America, being such a Japanese company that I'm just like, when I saw Nintendo's tweet, I was like, oh man, like this is amazing. And I'm just seeing
this year is just crazy. And it's world altering event after world altering event. And much of it is for the better. Much of it is still very painful. Obviously, I don't want to minimize anybody. And obviously, we don't want to minimize the coronavirus pandemic that still is going on. It's still active and still impacting people's lives and will continue to do so because of the protests, unfortunately. I'm not by any means saying people shouldn't be protesting, but I am saying there are unfortunate consequences of protesting during a global pandemic. And it's going to come back around and it's going to be painful, but to see it, the video game industry is just so monolithic in some of the ways, in some of its habits, and to see a lot of those habits get toyed with and played with just because of the world and playing with it. Sorry, that's the wrong verb there. Just to see them get moved and get shaken. That's the word that I'm looking for by events like this is from just an objective historical standpoint, fascinating to watch and be a part of. So, anyways,
and to quote, I was going to say one last nugget before you do that. To quote Blessing, he's, like I said, a black voice that I've been listening to. He is in support of most of these companies tweeting things. Of course, the thing he expects to see, and a lot of the Black American guests on the show also follow the sentiment, is that they want action behind the company's voices and words. Like apparently Coca-Cola tweeted out something that was completely vapid. It was just like you said, they don't even mention Black Lives Matter. They don't even mention George Floyd. I don't know if it's Coca-Cola specifically, but there are companies that are not putting their words or their actions to their words. And so it's expected that if you're going to tweet something in support of Black Lives Matter or in support of the Black communities, that you need to put actions behind it. And so he was kind of being a person of influence in the gaming industry who knows people who work at all these gaming companies that are tweeting these things. Like he is kind of calling them out to action. And it's cool the ones I highlighted are the ones that are taking some of the action. So if you see these tweets, don't just automatically assume the company's doing something cool. Also, please go check out Ben & Jerry's, an ice cream company. They have the absolute best Black Lives Matter tweet, blog post I have ever seen. benjerry.com. Go there and check it out. Read the thing. It is, I kind of want to read the whole thing on the show. It's so good, but I'm not going to do that. Yeah. But please go do that. It is phenomenal. But anyway,
Yeah,
so
you guys are. This is going to be. There's going to be at least a week between when we record this and when this goes live. So
that's true.
Many of you, again, this has probably been an exhaustive discourse just over the last week for the rest of you, and for us as well. By the time this airs, so we know you're sick of hearing about it, and who knows, maybe things have changed even just in the last week since then, or since we record this. But again, it's important to us and it's on our minds right now. And we want to just sort of reiterate our thoughts on it since we blog posted about it during the heat of it all. Anyways, We will move on and we will awkwardly transition into
talking about our beers,
much less serious conversation. So we will put in between a very serious topic and a very frivolous topic. We're going to just do this weird sounding awkward noise making thing. Okay, great. Now we're at a video game podcast again. All right, so yes, let's make it. We're going to skip favorite things because we didn't think it was appropriate to talk about what we're excited about this week when this week has been terrible. So instead, we are going to just catch up on talking about our beer, and then we will move into DLC for you DLC fans. So I am finishing the last of my dragon fruit sours, dragon fruit watermelon sours.
Man, you are really good at making a beer last.
I knew you were going to say that. I was going to preempt it and say you may be wondering how Penguin made a 6-pack of beer last more than a month. It's because I don't want to go out to the grocery store more than I need to. So, I got a 6-pack. I made it last as long as I can, and I have 2 more of a whole different 6-pack, and then I will have to replenish my beer. So that's my answer. It's good. I love it.
Because this podcast episode is about dads, I am holding in my hand a Kona Brewing Longboard Island Lager, and how I got this was because I was at the store looking for lagers because my dad was coming over for my son's 5th birthday, and he loves lagers, so I was trying to provide something he would enjoy and something he would drink, and so I have a 6-pack. I've had this beer a lot. It's a hopped lager, and Kona Brewing is in Hawaii. I went to their brewery when I was there 2 years ago. Phenomenal beer. I love it. It's just a super easy drinkable beer, kind of like Yingling, but with a little bit more hop on the front. And the body and everything, the feel and kind of the color is the same as like a Yingling would be. But that's why I have Longboard Lager. So Longboard Island Lager, excuse me. You guys should go check this beer out. And it is Father's Day. He didn't like it because of the hops.
Nice. All right. Well, speaking of your dad, let's move on to our segment before our main topic, which is DLC. Stands for
downloadable content, because our names are Dan.
Yeah, and it's a fun mini discussion underneath our main discussion, I guess over top of technically, but it is a more lighthearted discussion than our main topic. And sometimes it has something to do with it, sometimes it doesn't. This time it does, and it's a conversation you wouldn't normally have about video games. So, in honor of our fathers, since it is Father's Day, let us take time to honor our fathers. And I wanted to break down, and I just wrote this, you can see in the notes, I just wrote it as, if your dad was a video game character, fill in the blank. What kind of game would it be? What would it look like? What would it play like? If your dad was a video game character.
This DLC makes me want to have already played Days Gone, but my dad, being like a redneck biker, makes me think of Deacon St. John from Days Gone, but I haven't played it, so I don't know his personality or how he is, but just like that image, that's who my dad would be. If you played Days Gone, and maybe that's not I don't know. I really wish I'd played it, because that's like the perfect fit, because he is...
But obviously a motorcycle biker, a bike-centric kind of game. Would it be like a racing game, do you think? Or would it be more like a wander-around sandbox, open-world exploration?
It would be a mix of BioShock Infinite and... what was the other game I was thinking? And like Last of Us. No, I'm sorry. Like Far Cry 5. Like Far Cry 5 and BioShock Infinite both have like themes of American exceptionalism, because my dad loves America. Yeah. But in those video games, the American exceptionalism is bad. In this game, it would be kind of like Duke Nukem.
Just like fun and over the top, just meant for.
Well, my dad's not jovial either. My dad's very serious, and so he takes things serious. but he's very serious about America, and he's a redneck biker. So it's like mixing up all this stuff. It would be like him taking on missions for the government, like going into these greasy dive bars on his Harley and like wrecking,
taking out enemies of the state.
Yeah, you like that kind of stuff. That would
Nice.
be the kind of game that my dad would be in.
Yeah, awesome. My dad was... Oh, go ahead.
That's a complete caricature of my dad. I mean, like, that's just taking some aspects of his life. Sorry,
Yeah.
like, people who don't know my dad are like thinking, holy cow, who's this guy's dad? Like, don't take him wrong. He is a great dad.
No, of course, and mine is going to be caricaturized as well. So my dad is not 100% the cartoon character. I think of him in my head sometimes. But that's the whole point of the DLC, is to take that cartoon version of our dads that we have in our head and make a video game out of them. Anyways, my dad, there's two that come to mind, and I'm kicking myself for not having thought of this first one earlier, because it was not the first one that came to mind. But my dad was a postal carrier, a postal employee for 40 years. Yeah, a very long time. He retired 10 years ago, actually. On this day, 10 years ago. That's actually funny. He's posted about that on Facebook today.
Nice.
My dad would... So in that part of his life, I think of like the game Paperboy.
Yes.
The just top down, like 2D, like total NES graphics, but you're delivering post and you're running away from dogs and stuff. He had that little dog mace. I always loved his little... I don't unfortunately have a funny story of my spraying myself with it, because he always made such a big deal to not spray myself with the dog mace. But yeah, he had a can of dog mace and everything, and he would win.
Is that in Paperboy?
I don't think
dog
so.
Mace in the game? Oh, okay.
I don't think so. But in this version of Paperboy, but with my dad, that's yeah. You have dog mace, so you sprayed. You get little cans. You run over a power up that's dog mace, and but it's like 2-bit sounds. So it's like more like and you win points, like, because my dad would always, like, everyone loved Postman Bob, Mailman Bob. There was tons of people in my hometown that everyone knew Mailman Bob. So you'd win points and win favor with everybody. So that's one. The one that first came to mind, though, is I imagine a kind of like Minecraft-like game that's all about, like, my dad's such a handyman. He loves getting hyper focused on projects, building projects and stuff like that. Around the house, but they always, again, the caricature, the cartoon version of my dad, it's always, sometimes I think to myself, I'm like, Dad, that's the most useless crap. Like, you don't need to do this. And so that would be the entire game, is like going around and building like the most useless crap, like not functional, or functional, but not like, oh, this is like pragmatic. No, this is just like the most ridiculous crap. And that would be like all of your objectives would be like, build a fire pit that's surrounded by porch swings. Like, what? Yeah. So, and see how much it, and like, no, you take orders and you go to the houses and build them. And then the point is to lower the property value as much as possible. So anyways, I love you, Dad. If you ever listen to this, it was meant for a joke, but it is, yes, that's the game that I envision making. That would center around Mailman Bob and my dad, the unnecessary fix-it man.
Nice.
All right, cool. That's DLC. All right, we're going to get into our main topic and talk about dads, but the dads that are in our games. But I wanted to just make a quick disclaimer, so if I can get serious again, if you will indulge me in getting serious again for just a second.
Rein it in. Here we go.
We acknowledge the fact that not everybody was fortunate enough to have dads that were as great as ours. So Father's Day can be a painful day for a lot of people out there. There are a lot of people who want to be fathers, but for whatever circumstances can't be, and that is painful. And we're also speaking from our experiences and just sort of broad generalized strokes as to what fatherhood looks like and what what makes a good dad versus a bad dad, knowing that human beings are infinitely more complicated than that than what we could just reduce them to in video game characters. And a 20-30 minute discussion about dads. Also acknowledging too that, like, many of the characteristics we're going to be talking about, mothers have them too. Like, it's not a gender exclusive thing. Parenthood has characteristics that transcend gender, and a lot of moms, deserve the respect as well. But we are dads and we are males. And so we're going to, and this is a day about fatherhood, so we wanted to touch on that topic. So we do apologize if we offend anybody or hurt somebody. If any of these topics might be hard for you to listen to, then by all means, please feel free to skip this one. So cool. Does that cover everything?
I think so. And you also just lay the groundwork of giving video game studios content to make, because holy cow, the complexities of fatherhood and all those situations you just described could be amazing for protagonists and characters in video games, and portray and representation of all of that in video games that we don't see a lot.
Yeah. I mean, these are topics that are often touched on in television and movies and books, but aren't quite so often touched on in video games. Are just starting to dip their toe into that well of content. So cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now that we laid that disclaimer out here, let's jump into the meat of it. What does fatherhood mean to you? So we're going to start there. We're going to talk about fatherhood in general, and talk about your experiences with your dad and your experiences as a dad, and how they've sort of shaped your view of what does it mean to be a father.
Yeah, that's a deep question. That's a whole nother episode. And
sure.
We only have 20 minutes of this. Okay, so wow. Okay, fatherhood. What does it mean to me? It means being 100%, making your children 100% of your life, making your children everything that is a grid that you think everything else through. So before you make any decision in life, before you do anything else, you think of your kids first. And before you care about yourself, before you care about anyone else, your kids matter more than anything else. And that is an ideal. Obviously, we're going to fail at that. And it's sometimes not sustainable to do that. And
right, and it's an all-encompassing thing, because you need to care about your kids. You also have to care about your own mental well-being and your own health. So you sometimes have to make what would seem on the surface as selfish decisions. And then you also have to take care of your relationship, because you want those kids to thrive in an environment where they have two parents that love each other. There's science and everything. Every study that's been shown or that's been done on this thing has shown that children just thrive better under two parents that love each other. So your relationship also has to be a priority. It's an all-consuming lifestyle perspective. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to kind of include that.
It's an extremely important role in influencing your kids and how they will perceive their world. I will ruin my kids. You will ruin every dad ruins their kids somehow. It's just a matter of how and how hard and how deep. And so it's a matter of mitigating the ruin and trying to uplift and build your child's life and worldview, and give them a childhood and give them a worldview of ideologies that matter, to make them a member of society that is caring and loving, but sufficient. Self-sufficiency is something you have to instill in your kids. There's so much, there's so many topics. And now, because of the week in the context of what's going on in the world, I am thinking back to the hundreds of years of Black males being unfairly criminalized and removed from their families, leaving their moms and kids with no dad, generation after generation, and how you just said the studies are the kids. Now I'm acknowledging my privilege and I'm rambling, and that's fatherhood.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind is just responsibility. You know what I mean? That ultimately, to me, if you could boil down the idea of fatherhood to one other adjective, to me it would be responsibility. I've been thinking about responsibility a lot recently, not just with the context of what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, people needing to take responsibility not only for their own actions, but our government, and needing to hold the government to account and to take responsibility. So I've been thinking, that's been on my mind recently, and oh my gosh, does that apply to fatherhood? The minute I found out my wife was pregnant, it was okay, everything you were talking about, it all boils down to I need to step up. I need to take responsibility. And that's parenthood in general, right? And yeah, like you said, every parent screws up their kid, and some that's expected. Everybody has daddy issues, right? Yep. But yeah, just being able to take responsibility just for yourself, your failings, your weaknesses, your vices, and not every parent is perfect at that. But being willing to at least do that, I think, is kind of, to me, what I've sort of come to think about with fatherhood. And I had a bunch of other things I was going to say, and for whatever reason, they all just completely left my brain.
They're all gone. You mentioned one thing in your initial talk there. You talked about relationship. And fatherhood is a relationship. It's a relationship with your kids. You want to get to know them. It starts out as they're babies and they're tiny and little. That's kind of the stage you're at.
Oh, it's hard to get past that. It's hard to think about the fact that my tiny, cute, little, adorable baby who needs me, and he bonked his head today and he wept on my shoulder for 5 minutes straight. And it's that little thing is going to be a little bratty teenager at some point, and how do I see him and acknowledge him for where he is at that point in life and what he needs at that point. He's not going to need his dad to like hold him and tell him he's a good boy or what. He's not going to need that from me at that point. At that point, he's going to need discipline. He's going to need consistency. He's going to need someone to just sit there and listen to him. Like being able to like be with them at whatever stage they're in. Because like you said, yeah, at first they're little babies, and it's so hard for so many parents to like, no, you're not a baby anymore. And so your needs are entirely different. It's so hard for us to get past that. I know it's going to be hard for me to get past that.
Yeah, it's going to be super hard. And as they grow up, like my son, Sam, he's just had his 5th birthday. And in my own life, I remember my 5th birthday, which means permanent memories are now a thing. The things I'm doing now, Sam will remember forever. Well, maybe. I mean, I have like Swiss cheese memory of my 5-6-year-old life days, and it's more of just like ideologies or like abstract kind of feelings that I remember more than specific incidences, but still they're there. And fatherhood means you want to love your kids, and you want to treat them as humans, and you want to listen to what they have to say, and you want to meet them as a person, as a caretaker, as someone who loves them more than, or not, I wouldn't say loves them more than anyone else in the world, but loves them in a very unique and specific way that no one else can fill that role unless you completely fail as a father and somebody else comes in and takes over that role. So you don't want to go down that path. And I know some of you have, and you have like dads that aren't your biological dad that are more of a dad to you.
And that's
what
great.
I'm getting at. That's whatever that relationship is what I'm talking about right now. It doesn't have to be biological. It's just, this person is your dad, and there's one person, usually one dad. If you are a family of 2 dads, I would love to talk to you, because that is an experience I am so for, and I support you. If you have 2 dads, or if 2 dads are adopting, I just don't know. I am super ignorant, and I acknowledge that failure right now. I don't even know. I don't have a clue. But in my world, like you said, what does fatherhood mean to me? It is uniquely an individual that has a relationship with a person, whether it be a son or a daughter or any other gender, as you identify, in like there's no one else that's going to replace that. And so it's a burden, but it's also exciting and kind of cool to be in this unique situation.
Yeah. And like if I can speak as one more characteristic that comes to mind is like, and this kind of goes to experiences with father, I think, but like one of the things that's big for me is like, in thinking about fatherhood is like, I want my kid, there's the idea of protection. I want to protect my kid. I want to put a hedge around him. I don't want to be a helicopter parent and just be like, constantly afraid that he's going to hurt himself. So I do want to also give him, as much freedom as is appropriate for his age group. But there's that aspect of wanting to be like protecting, not just protecting him physically and mentally and all that stuff, but also protecting him from adulthood, in the sense that like when you're a kid, all you want to do is, I want to grow up. I want to hit the next milestone. I want to be a teenager. I want to I want to get a cell phone. I want to get a car. I want to go to college and move out. I want to do this. And then when you're a grown up, you're just like, oh my gosh, too much. Please, can we stop with the adulting and go back to being kids again? So as a parent, there's that aspect of being like, I want to protect him from himself, wanting to grow up too fast, and be like, how can I like enable you to be okay with being a kid? So making your boyhood, making your childhood, in the case of a daughter, just as quite frankly innocent as it can be. And that means a lot. There's so much that goes into that, because again, not to get too painful, but so many people do not have that experience. But real quick, we've sort of touched on our experiences as dads a little bit in answering fatherhood, but let's both talk a little bit about what our fathers were like beyond the cartoon versions that we presented in DLC today.
My dad was a ridiculously hard worker and super handy. He spent his Monday through Friday working 8 to 16 hours a day, trying to bring as much money home as possible to provide for us. He worked his rear end off, and the weekends were spent getting all of the things done around the house, because my mom was a homemaker. She was at home all the time, so she would handle the day-to-day, like cooking, cleaning, laundry inside the house. But my dad was the one that was taking care of the yard, taking care of the cars, fixing anything that broke, because we didn't grow up with a whole lot of money, and we had to make everything work as we had. And so he wasn't like one to go out on family adventures and spend like deep quality time with his son and that kind of stuff. But he loved us in a different way by his dedication to constantly like provide for us and show us. And he came down hard with discipline and when he needed to, and it worked. But the thing I can attribute to him most, and I've told him this, is we lived a life with a stable environment that allowed us to thrive because we knew when we went to school, we came home to a stable family, and we knew we were going to have food on the table. We were going to have help with our homework. We could always talk to dad about things. He preached over and over again about open communication and you can ask me anything you want. Of course, as a teenager, when he's telling you this, you're like, I'm not going to tell you about the crushes I have. You're already putting guards up. Yeah, but he genuinely has a heart to pursue us at that time, and he even to this day, he told us, this kind of sums him up as a person. This is great. He said, I feel like I worked too much and didn't spend enough time with you, but I, as his kid, I don't feel that way. I don't feel like I've missed out on my dad. I feel like I got plenty of time. We had a great childhood, and I feel like we did tons of fun stuff together growing up, that our relationship is solid, and he feels that way, and I acknowledge that. I'm like, I can see why you would feel that way now as a dad, and seeing, based on what you're telling me, the stories of how much you worked. But the fact that I didn't feel that is indicative of his character and how he was as a dad. So yeah, I love my dad.
Yep, I love my dad too. It's a very similar story in regards to what you were talking about. My dad was both an incredibly hard worker and also incredibly handy. My dad ended up working 2 jobs. Like I said, he was a postal carrier for 40 years. But when that was not enough, he also worked at a gas station pretty much 5 nights a week. Pretty much, growing up, and some weekends. So ultimately, unfortunately, I didn't end up seeing a lot of my dad growing up, but he would always be there eventually. You know what I mean? He was not an absent father by any stretch of the imagination.
Yep.
Going into my teenage years and also in my childhood, to some level, my dad never really got me. My mom got me. My mom was able to understand me. And so I always had a fondness for my mom that I can't say I had for my dad at the time. He tried to get me, but he never got my interest in video games. He never really got my interest in sci-fi and fantasy and books and stuff like that. So yeah, we just didn't bond on a lot of shared interests. And he was pretty, as a strong disciplinarian, he, had expectations of me that I felt were unfair. Looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was such an entitled little brat. But at the time, I felt those things were unfair expectations of me. And yeah, I also never felt that my dad got me. So that caused a lot of friction. What caused even more friction was the fact that he did try. To his credit, he tried very hard to form a relationship with me. He, got involved with me in Boy Scouts. And that was one of the few things that we did have in common and kind of bond over. But other than that, we didn't have a lot that we bonded over. And so we butted heads because we're unfortunately more alike than I would like to admit at some points, and he might like to admit at some points. So yeah, we had a lot of friction, but I mean, I was able to, in my adulthood, I was able to talk through some of those things with him and hash it out, and we both grew closer as a result of being able to kind of speak our realities of. And now that I'm a dad, I'm like, oh my gosh, Dad, I'm so sorry, I put you through so much hell. And I deserve every ounce of crap that Gavin's going to give me as my son. So, yeah, definitely have a deep appreciation for my dad. But I mean, still to this day, we're different. And there are some attitudes and perspectives he have that just frustrate me more because I'm his son. And I'm like, I now expect more of you, Dad. But yeah, ultimately though, he was a great hard worker and truly did try. And he's got great qualities too. He's funny. I get my sense of humor from him easily. And,
wait, you have a sense of humor?
I'm
sorry.
It's a crappy one,
Mr.
but it's there. But yeah, I get a lot from my dad, and that stubborn Grathwall pride. As much as it can be a pain in the butt sometimes, it's also one of my I would consider one of my more redeeming characteristics. So thanks, Dad, for all of that. Anyways, so are they ever going to talk about video games? Yes.
We are 40 minutes in.
45 minutes into the show. Let's talk about video game dads. So what are some examples of fathers in video games, and what are different ways in which they are portrayed?
Yeah, this is cool. I put together a little list here of some ideas for us to talk about. You feel free to add or take away from any of this list here in our notes. But I want to talk about the most prominent one in our culture right now in the video game industry is Kratos from God of War.
Yeah.
It was 2018's Game of the Year. Absolutely blew the gaming industry out of the water. Everyone who has a PlayStation 4 should play this game. Go buy a PlayStation 4 to play this game. It is totally worth
we have
it.
waxed eloquent about this game. As many of our regular listeners know, we talk about the game a lot, and we love it. And it is one of the inspirations for this episode. So we will, be deep diving a little bit into Kratos in a bit. But there's some other examples too. This episode is airing the week that The Last of Us Part 2 is coming out. And that's no coincidence, because another great father figure, prominent one in the gaming industry, is Joel from the first Last of Us game, who will be present, if not playable, present in The Last of Us Part 2. So that relationship, that father-daughter relationship in that game, hopefully we'll have some development and deepening in part 2. So
I expect that it will. So with Kratos, what's interesting is the game came out around a time where we're still in it. I don't know what you want to call it or define it in our culture or in our movements or in our thoughts or what's in our generation. Maybe it's a generational thing, but toxic masculinity is under attack, and it's great. Like, it's awesome. We're questioning the whole machoism of being a man and what that looks like in culture and society today, because it was kind of shaped by the boomer generation for a while, and then it changed in the Gen X generation. It goes on and on. We have a generational discussion in a previous episode, so go check that out if you want to know more. But with Kratos, like, he is a tough, hardened, nothing but work hard and discipline, like no emotion, no joy, but it's all internal. And you see him want to break through that barrier of machoism to get to know his son. And he's trying to protect his son, but also train him to be a warrior at the same time.
Preparing him.
Yeah. So, like, to prepare someone to be a warrior, you have to let certain things happen that you don't want that to happen. Like you were talking about how Gavin smacks his head and you coddle him for 5 minutes now, but you don't want to be a helicopter parent later, and you want to expose your children to a level of danger that is helpful, that will help them grow. And so this game deals with the complexities of all of that.
Right. I just remembered one of the things I was going to say, what parenthood is about. Sorry, and this is relevant though.
This is good. I'm done.
One of the things parenthood is, again, I constantly think as a father, what is my goal? What is my end game? My goal as a parent, that every parent should have, not all do, unfortunately, but every parent should have the single solitary driving goal of, I need to raise a fully functioning adult in 18 years. I need to raise
a contributing member of society.
A human being who is ideally able to survive, able to contribute to society, and able to do so with as little therapy as possible. By the time they turn 18. This is Kratos is kind of an interesting gaming example of that, because those are some of his goals throughout the game. But as we'll talk later, it's deeper than that. But one of the interesting thing about Kratos as a character is his evolution, and we talked about this many times before, but it's worth reiterating here. His evolution as a character he's from an existing franchise, right? Like God of War for PlayStation 4 is like the 7th game in a franchise that's existed for at least a decade and a half. And his earlier incarnations were the epitome of this toxic masculinity you were talking about. Just a vengeance machine, a killing machine, BA, no emotion, but pure anger, like rage machine. That's the only emotion that's acceptable for a man to show. And we're basing an entire game franchise on it. To take that character and to actually give him a context in which he has to grow and change and acknowledge his weaknesses, in my mind, he's gaming dad number one. I saw a article that was like the best and worst gaming dads, and they put Kratos at near the bottom of the list, and I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Kratos is one of the best portrayals of a father in gaming right now. But
he represents the best growth and change of a father. But if you just look at him as like Atreus, his son is how old now? And it took him that long to kind of figure it out. And so the whole baby early childhood bonding stage is gone and shot. Like, he just wrecked all of that because he wasn't around. And so maybe if you like objectively analyzed his life as a dad, it's probably not that great.
But you see that game, I don't care about that. In my content, that's not meaningful to me. That doesn't teach me anything. The perfect dad doesn't teach me anything as a father, and how to interact with my son. I don't want or care about James McCloud from Star Fox. James McCloud has nothing to teach me as a father. Kratos has so much to teach me as a father because yeah, and for reason, we'll break that down more. I want to talk more about Kratos later, but I also wanted to break more of some of these dads down. Another example is a very contrasting example is James McCloud, which is Fox McCloud's father from the Star Fox series, and he literally just serves to be sacrificed on the altar of Fox's motivation. Like Star Fox needs a reason to destroy Andros, and so that reason is Andros killed his dad. That's literally James McCloud's entire role in Star Fox. Yep. So that, again, to me is like, he's just this paragon. He's held up on this pedestal. We don't ever get to know him because he's dead. So the dead dad trope, the only way to describe it is a trope. And that's kind of another way that video game dads are portrayed. But yeah.
Yeah, and aside, like a little side note, derailing our conversation a little bit, if you just look at the portrayal of dads in video games over the history of gaming, like Joel from The Last of Us and Kratos being kind of the newer, that's that last generation and this generation, and that's it. Like those are the only two that are actually meaningful and like you can kind of digest in like a mainstream way. There's some indie games like Octodad and there's a dad dating sim that's hilarious and kind of satirical, but and so like outside of like, I'm talking about the AAA, like mainstream gaming, Kratos and Joel, God of War and The Last of Us is pretty much like with any value or meaning. And maybe John Marston from Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah, I was going to say, give John Marston some credit.
But that's still last generation. Like that's still the same generation as Last of Us. That's the PS3, Xbox 360 generation. Right, so we had no good examples of good dads in PS2, like PlayStation 2, GameCube, Xbox era, and prior to that,
BioShock?
Other than tropes.
What would BioShock
BioShock is definitely an Xbox 360, PS3. Okay, it's last generation too.
Yeah. No,
same with Heavy Rain and Half-Life 2. Like all of our examples of what dads look like didn't really creep up until like the early aughts.
Yeah, because I was going to say BioShock touches on fatherhood in some subtle ways.
It does, yeah. Yep.
And definitely more in the realm of adoptive fatherhood, which is what Last of Us touches on too. But BioShock, you have Jack Ryan in the first game, who ends up becoming an adoptive, or rather, depending on spoilers, which ending you choose. If you choose to save all the little sisters, then they end up talking about you as becoming an adoptive father to all of them. So it touches on that if you choose the right ending. BioShock 2, you are a big daddy to the little sisters. So that's also sort of an adoptive father situation. And then, of course, BioShock Infinite, huge spoilers for that. I mean, you have two versions of one person, one of which is a terrible, awful, oppressive, abusive father, and the other one, which is that paragon of fatherly virtue of wanting to save and go put himself in danger for his daughter. So you actually end up having a picture of two dads. So it touches on every single one of those games touches on fatherhood in an interesting way, if not a bit cliche in many cases kind of way.
So let's break down Joel a little bit from The Last of Us.
Yeah, Kratos and Joel is where we want to spend most of our time.
Yep, and we talked about Kratos. So now Joel, you start off The Last of Us with Joel and his daughter Sarah, and they're having a regular night in suburban America, and she presents him like a birthday gift of a watch, and they joke and have a good time on the couch watching a show. They go to bed, and you start off playing as Sarah, and she wakes up, and there's a catastrophe happening as a result of a pandemic, which is way too real for me to even...
but if coronavirus turned people into like weird fungus zombies, then that would be a whole different level of That's
the only thing that like
reality,
really doesn't set this thing. Yeah. And then spoilers, it happens in the first 15 minutes. Sarah is caught up in some trauma and she dies.
Which is one of the most heartbreaking video game scenes.
It'll
like ever. It's just like I am a grown, again, 30-year-old man, and when I played that, I was like, don't cry. Don't cry. I'm not crying, you're crying.
Yep. And then Joel continues to, like, we go into post-apocalyptic, like, fast forward many, many years. He's now a little old, and he is trying to survive in these little groups that are kind of gathering in survival groups. And he meets Ellie, the main protagonist, who would be his daughter's age, matched almost. And so he kind of takes in Ellie, projects his entire grief of the loss of his daughter and being a dad and what he wants for Ellie. It completely projects all of that onto her. And it's completely unfair to Ellie. It's like she doesn't want this relationship. They grow together throughout the entire game, and it culminates into an ending that is ridiculous, and it's the toxicity of projecting your entire emotions and your need without therapy and not processing properly what that could look like.
But
fallout.
It's also interesting because, again, like getting in the realm. This is huge spoilers for The Last of Us. But hey, The Last of Us Part 2 is coming out, so if you don't want to have to play an entire other game, just listen to our podcast. The game ends with basically like, so Ellie is the thing about Ellie is she's immune to the I was about to say coronavirus. She's immune to whatever infection causes these fungus zombies. So the whole game you're trying to get to the people who will be able to extract the cure from her, and that's the entire premise of the game. You get there only to find out that, and again, you grow together. She becomes a surrogate daughter to him, so this becomes an adoptive father-daughter relationship. And then he finds out at the very end that in order to extract the cure, they'll have to kill her. They'll have to harvest all of her blood, basically, to find and manufacture a cure.
And you would think, in the world of media that we consume today, that this is going to turn into a self-sacrificial story where Ellie is like, she becomes I love you,
Jesus,
sacrifice yourself, and for the good of everyone else.
Nope, you go on a rampage.
Ellie does that. Ellie does do that. Uh-huh. Ellie is cool with this. She goes forward with it, but right at the last minute, here comes Joel. Like, nope, not losing my second daughter, and kidnaps her body, her alive. She's fine. She's alive. Kidnaps her. Like you said, crazy alarms going off. They're under attack. They escape. She's unconscious the whole time, and he steals her and the cure for humanity away for himself. And they hide out, and apparently the second game will pick up where they left off.
Which is funny. It's really funny.
Communicating what he did to her and what this happened, because so she's going on thinking, I miraculously survived this operation and everyone's going to be healed, but nope. So I can't wait to see the drama and the fallout of that.
Well, so and it's funny that your take on that is like, Joel's a bad dad for that.
I'm furious.
But
I was so mad at that ending.
What makes it interesting is that, so number one, you missed out a couple details. Ellie did not know she was sacrificing herself. They told her that all they needed was a little bit of her blood. They didn't need to put her unconscious, but that she would survive it. And then they told Joel that she wouldn't survive it. So they lied to Ellie. But then
Ellie didn't know.
Ellie didn't know, yeah. Okay. And then, then Joel, but so she wasn't some Jesus figure willing to sacrifice her life. That's the important thing.
Okay.
I think she might have been willing, but they still didn't tell her that, I believe, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about it. Either way, Joel ends up lying to her, saying, yeah, it's cool. Yep. Everything's good. Don't worry about it. So there's that. So it's funny though that you perceive that as being a bad dad. In my mind, or not necessarily in my mind, because I can acknowledge and understand the complicated nature of that. But I read someone's take on it that they were like, he was willing to let the entire world end for his daughter. And I think that that's an interesting like way of framing it, where it's like he was not willing to let an injustice happen to his daughter, to let a deception happen to his daughter effectively. And that all does stem from his own loss of his daughter at the beginning of the game. But again, to me that he may not be the best person in the world, but in regards to identifying with him as a father, as a parent, like, you have to ask yourself the question, would I let my child die so that people might live? Because it's not even a guarantee. It's so that other people might live. Like, that is a question that hopefully parents never have to grapple with, but it speaks to that idea of like, how much am I willing to let my kids? So again, it has a lot to teach us about fatherhood. So let's use that as a segue to talk about our next question. What can these games, specifically Last of Us and God of War, what can they teach us about being a father? What lessons can we learn from Joel and Kratos as dads, especially considering that the nature of their relationships with their kids are pretty diverse? You have one pair that is a father-son, and another pair that's a father-daughter, and one pair that's biological, and the other pair that is surrogate, adoptive. So let's break all that down and talk about, what do those relationships in those games, fictional relationships, have to teach us about being dads?
Well, Kratos teaches vulnerability, being able to be open with your kids and accepting their failures, because Kratos has to wrestle with that too as he's training his son to be a warrior. Like, he's not going to get it right away. And at the beginning of the game, Kratos is very angry and like, why aren't you getting this, boy? Like, do this. And eventually he softens his heart to like kind of let his son learn and grow in his own way. And so that's teaching us as dads. So we have to understand And I'm already experiencing this right now. It sounds ridiculous when you compare like what a video game is teaching me and my son, but it's true when it comes to things like riding a bike. We have training wheels on it. He falls, and I'm like, do I adjust? Do I change? Like, I want to teach him how to ride a bike. Like, that's got to be a thing he needs to learn. It's a skill he'll use for the rest of his life. And so you have all these questions, and but you have to come at it from his perspective. And my dad, adult life, with the projection of like, you need to learn how to ride a bike, son. Go do this. He's falling off of his bike over and over again, and then he becomes scared to ride the bike because he's afraid of the chastisement or the lecture about why he fell.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not mean. I'm not mad. I'm not that kind of dad. Like, I go down, I'm like, I ask him questions that makes him think about what happened. Every time he falls, I'm like, why did you fall? What do you think happened?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he doesn't like that. He hates falling, so he doesn't want to have that discussion. He just wants to ride his bike. He just wants to have fun. And so now he doesn't want to ride his bike, so he starts walking. And I have to acknowledge from his perspective, that is something that is kind of influenced by my playthrough of God of War. Like, trying to look at what's happening from the child's perspective. It's like, I'm falling, it hurts, I get up, my dad lectures me. None of this is good. I don't want to ride my bike. And I totally understand that perspective. So it's kind of shifted my focus away from, so now when he falls, I'm just like, okay, get back up. Like, that's it. Just get back up and keep going. I don't say anything else anymore. And he loves it. Like, it's working. I can see him kind of figuring it out on his own. And I got to have that hands-off approach. So like, that's a super shallow, like, tip of the iceberg kind of explanation of what Kratos has taught me that I can put into practice.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So to dig a little deeper, I think Kratos really embodies that responsibility I was talking about earlier, and not just in sort of the surface. I have to teach my son practical realities of this world, though that is present and super. Again, that is like the moment to moment meat of the game. But beyond that, there are some very exceptional moments where they really dig into this aspect of Kratos' past, and how he has to take responsibility, not just for his son, but for himself. And one of the defining quotes of the entire game comes right near the beginning. And the funny thing is, you don't get the irony of it until later, until you finish the game. But the quote is, Atreus tries to shoot at something with his bow and misses. And he says, I'm sorry, because again, like you said, he's expecting that lecture. And Kratos' line to him is, don't be sorry, be better. The irony of that line is that Kratos doesn't understand at that moment that line, he needs to practice what he preaches. Because the whole game, again, for those unfamiliar with God of War, Kratos was a god. He was a person first, but he was elevated to godhood and given divine power after the first game. But then he finds out that his dad Zeus was responsible for the death of his family, so he goes on a killing rampage and kills the entire Greek pantheon, basically, of gods.
Yep.
But so this game picks up where he's like moved into an entirely different region and governed by entirely different deities, the Norse gods, he's trying to lay low and atone for his past murderous self, and try to forget and bury his past as a god murdering machine. And, but then also has to wrestle with the reality that he himself is divine. He himself is a demigod, basically, and has this divinity of these, has the same attribute of these beings that he himself hates. So Kratos is the poster child for self-hatred at the beginning of this game. He hates the fact that he is a god, and he passes that hatred onto his own son, because he acknowledges that Atreus, as the son of a god, is part god himself. And therefore and again, this is heartbreaking when the game brings this to your attention. It's heartbreaking when you realize Kratos, though he loves his son, he also hates his son, and he hates that aspect of himself that he sees in his son. So he hates himself, he hates his son, and he spends the entire game feeling sorry for himself, or the entire first half of the game basically feeling sorry for himself, trying to bury all of those emotions in the past and just atone for them. That's essentially feeling sorry, as opposed to wrestling with them, coming to terms with them, and growing and being better as a person. And so that's the entire emotional arc of Kratos in the game. And that emotional arc is also mirrored in Atreus, who then doesn't understand, as a child, he doesn't understand why does his father, he senses that his father hates him, but he doesn't know why. Kratos keeps the fact that that his son, that Atreus himself is part god. He keeps that from him, and that inner conflict of why does my dad hate me? I don't understand, eats away at Kratos. And then when he does finally acknowledge that Atreus is a god, Atreus then doesn't have the context by which to deal with that. So then that part of the game is trying to teach him how to be responsible. What I love,
that was so teenage,
it was
like
infuriating,
angst and annoying.
But at the same time, it's so instructive to fatherhood because, again, what do we have to learn from that emotional journey arc is, number one, we have to come to terms with our own failures and weaknesses as fathers, and then we have to acknowledge that we're passing that on to our children. You know, that is amplified in a lot of cases for many fathers if they have sons specifically. So not to minimize fathers who have daughters, because you probably will have the same things expressed in a different way. But especially fathers who have sons, it's like you will see so much of your son in you and you will hate that because the things you hate in your son are probably things that you hate in yourself. And that's a common thing for all dads to experience, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, so coming to terms with that and being able to, again, like I said, take ownership and take responsibility of it, and to continue to take ownership and responsibility of it when those worst parts of your personality express themselves through your kid. Mm-hmm. So
there was one small detail that you kind of missed, but not entirely, was that Zeus tricked Kratos and killed his family. But it was actually Ares that manipulated Kratos into killing his own family. So Kratos murdered his own family.
Yeah.
And he's bringing that
guilt. Yeah.
It doesn't change anything about what you said because Kratos is still working through all of that in himself and his own guilt that he has, and like seeing his son portray those same attributes. Like, you're not wrong. But that small detail just added a little bit more emphasis on
depth,
what Kratos is. Yeah, more depth. He killed his own original family, and that was his wife and kids before his Atreus child that you see in God of War 4.
Yeah.
And then, like, Zeus is his dad. In the second game, you do discover that. Zeus is his father, and his rage is back, is a revenge story against Zeus.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
Being a bad dad.
Why
so
did
now
Zeus,
he's been treated.
There was something, like, some more, I thought there was more light shed on, like, Zeus.
Quick Wikipedia. Kratos runs amok across the city of Rhodes because he's angered at fellow gods. Zeus intervenes and betrays Kratos, who is saved by the Titan Gaia. She tells him that he must now find the Sisters of Fate, who can change his fate and prevent his death at the hands of Zeus. Kratos is ultimately successful, and he's about to kill the god. Athena sacrifices herself to save Zeus and preserve Olympus, and tells Kratos that he is Zeus' son. Kratos then joins forces with Gaia and the Titans to attack Olympus.
So Kratos is just manipulated all over the place, but like Zeus is...
Yeah, his own dad betrayed him.
And you know, like, as much as we wanted to deride the original games for being a little, like, juvenile, I suppose, in the way they handle violence and stuff like that, you gotta respect the very Greek... That's a very Greek story. Like, that is right out of mythology. The father is prophesied to kill the son, so the son kills the father preemptively. Blah 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 blah. That's so Greek, and I love it in a lot of ways. Grecian tragedy, it's great.
And it continues in God of War 3 when Kratos is abandoned by the Titans that he allied with in the second game.
Right, so he continues to face betrayal and just kills everyone as a result, which is not the solution necessarily, but so that's why I love how the relationship with Kratos and Atreus is the center. Again, it's not some grand Greek tragedy. It's instead a very personal relationship between father and son, and it's taught me so much about being a dad. My son will probably hate the fact that I will constantly quote, "Don't be sorry, be better," to him. But that is as much a fair indictment of myself as it is my son. But I did want to also talk about Joel then. So what can Joel and Joel's story and Joel's fatherhood of Ellie essentially teach us about being a dad in the real world?
Maybe I just have, like, I'm so happy that Naughty Dog, the ending of Last of Us Part 1, despite how I don't agree with it at all and how furious I was at Joel when it happened, I love that they did it. And they went that way. They bucked all trends of media that we're used to and bucked all tropes and, like, went against the grain and was like, nope, we're going to have Joel steal Ellie away and selfishly have her as, and that's my view, right, that Joel is being selfish and having his daughter that he doesn't want to lose again for the second time, and prevent the cure from getting all over the world. And like I said earlier, I alluded to this, Joel projects all of his grief and all of his loss of his original biological daughter, Sarah, onto Ellie. And Ellie doesn't want it. Like, Ellie, I can't even imagine, I'm not an adopted, like, dad, I don't have adoptive kids, but I can't imagine that struggle. And I know you're asking, like, what does this teach me about fatherhood as a dad? But I'm seeing a lot of things. It's just made me more aware of the complexities of fatherhood in general, especially in that situation where sometimes your adoptive kids don't want you as a parent, and that's not your fault. And it again calls the parent to self-examination, like you mentioned with Kratos in God of War. It's like sometimes you have to wrestle with the fact that your child is going to go through things that is unrelated to you, but it comes out as a lash or an attack, or it feels like your child is hating you or doesn't like you as a father. But it's not that. It's this weird lens that you look at the relationship through. And so Joel has taught me to not project some of the things that I am going through in self-examination onto my relationship with my kids. It's kind of like, I got to work through myself. Like pretty much what you said about Kratos. It's interesting that you have two entirely different father figures in games, but you kind of can draw the same conclusion out of it, because one is a positive example of growth and maturity, and the other one is, in my mind, like a not as positive view of parenting and how it can go awry. And so you look at that as a bad example, and you caution yourself, and you figure out how you can move through life as a parent with that relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the lessons of Joel is it's complicated. You know what I mean? Like parenthood is complicated and full of missteps and pitfalls. And I think about, like, you know, as much as you're saying that, like, yes, Joel projects a lot. You're not wrong about any of that. Yes, Joel projects a lot. Yes, Ellie didn't ask for this. At the same time, the game very clearly presents Ellie thrives under Joel's parenthood. Like, she
and that's the
opens up.
Of the game.
Yeah, she opens up. She's able to, you know, she starts off as this kind of surly teenager, but she begins to open up to, like, you know, one of the most famous shots of the game is her, like, petting the giraffes. Like, she begins to open herself up to the beauty of the world around her, despite the fact that the world's falling apart. It's a really interesting progression for her character. And, she truly thrives under Joel. And so that ultimately brings the game ends on what I think is one of the most challenging questions that video games have ever asked, which is, how do you choose what's best for the world versus what is best for your child when those two things are at odds? And like, oh my gosh, I pray I'm never put in a circumstance where I have to choose between the well-being of, I'll narrow it a little bit and just say the well-being of my community, the well-being of my world, versus the well-being of my child. And there are so many circumstances and contexts in which that could play out. I hope none of them ever have to happen to me. I want my kid to be a contributing member of society, but what if that comes at the cost of him losing a part of himself or losing his life? Like heavy questions. Yeah. But again, it brings back that complication of what is your responsibility as a parent. And I don't at all blame Joel for taking, again, they were going to take the girl's life and they weren't even going to tell her about it. Like, rampage! But yeah, I mean, it's also interesting too. Like, it was very interesting playing those two games kind of back to back. I started The Last of Us before God of War came out. Then I picked up God of War, played through it all, and then, you know, I hadn't finished Last of Us, so I literally went right back to The Last of Us. And just, there are so many comparisons and contrasts. And I mean, again, both games taught me a lot about being a parent. And it was really interesting getting to play from the perspective of a parent of a daughter, considering the fact that I don't have a daughter. I still feel like I learned something about what to kind of expect if I'm ever blessed to have a daughter, I should say.
Yep.
I'm willing to spend a little bit of time. I wanted to talk about what aspects of fatherhood do you think, if we can do a really quick answer to this question, what aspect of fatherhood you think is missing from video games that no video game has really touched on? Or touched on well. Yeah,
going back to what I was saying earlier, like, fatherhood really wasn't represented even at all in any meaningful way, except for the last generation, and the examples that we have are what we just talked about. And there's so many other aspects of fatherhood that have been untouched. And so let's go. Like, let's explore that. What does two dads look like? Mm-hmm. What does biracial dads look like, where your child is oppressed and abused in a society and you're a dad? Like, what does... I mean, Heavy Rain touches a little bit on childhood abduction and what it looks like for a grieving father, but maybe it's still not. The childhood abduction is just kind of the plot device and motivation for the dad, but you don't really see
and the kid doesn't have a personality. Growth. The kid's just the perfect kid that was abducted. Like, what about how do you deal with like, and again, this is something that is heartbreaking, but all too common in those contexts. Like, so many parents express sometimes that they feel relief, like, I don't have to deal with this burden anymore, and they feel guilt over that too. It's like, oh my gosh, dig into that. What does that look like when it's suddenly like, oh, like, I don't have to put up with this kid's crap anymore. But my kid was taken from me. It's so complicated being a dad, being a father, being a parent, and having to deal with that. But when you just present this kid as this perfect little angel, like, it doesn't do justice to that circumstance, that situation. I also think, but again, like, dialing it back by significant levels of degrees, all of these games present fatherhood in such a way that is so dramatic. It's always life and death. It's always huge stakes. It's always gods and monsters, zombie apocalypse, end of the world. Like, what about, like, the aspect of fatherhood that it's just freaking boring? The fact where we drag our butts to work for every day. Like I said, with my dad dragged his butt to 2 different jobs every day, one of which required him to get up at the butt crack of dawn and then drag himself to a freaking gas station at night, but just to, like, provide for the well-being, to create an environment where his kids could thrive. Like, we work every day. We take care of our mental health and well-being just so that we can be the best we can for our kids. Like, it's not glamorous, it's not dramatic. Like, how could a game capture that in a way that's compelling for people who aren't fathers to teach them, or people who are fathers to help them grapple with that reality too? Like, that's something that I think is missing from the exploration of fatherhood.
The idea of desiring to be a dad and not being able to, like, someone who's desperate to be a dad, who wants kids and can't, through whatever, like, a myriad of circumstances, like from being single all the way up to being oppressed and having your voice shut down, whether it's your LGBT and, like, you can't, no one will allow you to adopt because of rules in place that stop you because you're LGBT and not mom, dad. Like,
right. And
like, dealing with those complexities.
Not to mention, like, infertility, where you have the circumstances.
Yeah, I was getting there. Yep, that was exactly. That was the next example. Like, there's a myriad of infertility, and then there's miscarriages and how to deal with that. Those aspects of fatherhood that haven't been, like, that's just ripe for the picking for any person to pick up and make a compelling story that portrays the emotions of all of those things. And that kind of is the gray area between massive stakes, gods and monsters, and then everyday, boring, frustrating fatherhood. I would like to see what a game with everyday, boring, frustrating fatherhood looks like. Like, it'd be kind of interesting. So I want to see that too. There's so much unrepresented fatherhood because it's still so new and so fresh. And this is my last thought, and then you can jump in, is that I think it's because gaming as an industry is still new, like coming out of the 70s, that we're now the first generation of their kids from the 70s and 80s are now growing up and being in the gaming industry. They're young folks that are now having kids, like my age. Like, I now have kids, and I'm in my low 30s, 33 years old. And if I was a software developer for a gaming industry company, it's because I played games as a kid and I grew up and loved games, and now I'm a dad. So this is the first time in society, in the world, that we have this generation of me, like the millennials that are having kids that are in the game development space. And with the technology and the tools to be able to portray emotions in a way that we've never had before.
I was totally going to add to that
foundation.
Right. You couldn't, in the NES Atari area, you couldn't tell a meaningful, emotional story with, like, squares on the screen. So, like, we had to get to a certain point technologically speaking. And, like, even in the early 2000s, like, there's a certain level of, like, how deep of a story can you tell when your characters still kind of look polygony and not timeless, not, like, you can't convey that emotional depth that you can now with the technology of face capturing and all that stuff. Like, really, and the graphical fidelity really helps tell those stories in a way that doesn't come across as just kind of shallow and comical. There's definitely
there's a lot of, like, RPGs and stuff that have fatherhood relationships there, and you can read those texts and have some music overlay, like some Final Fantasies and such, but they don't really explore fatherhood. I mean, there's probably some side characters. I know Final Fantasy X, there's some Jecht and Titus, like, there's a little bit of fatherhood stuff going on there, but it's never done to the level that it could be.
Orin is Titus's real dad. Let's be real. Not biologically speaking.
I don't even know enough about Final Fantasy X in memory to even know what you're saying.
Orin was like his father figure for sure. He was the good. Okay. He was the good dad. Right. Jecht is a piece of crap.
Nice. I was just trying to think of like Final Fantasy examples with dad.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Fatherhood, and I can't think of any. But in saying that, is like the NES, the Super Nintendo era, the Atari era. Yes, we had attempts at it. Like Dr. Light was Mega Man's dad, but what did that? Like, he was a creator. It was weird. Like there's not a lot of emphasis on it, though those developers were dads at the time. Now, but anyway, we have the technology and the tools to kind of embolden and provide a path and an avenue for which new millennial fathers and Gen Zers that are going to be coming up soon in the industry now can work together to like actually explore this whole new fatherhood way. So I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's end there. Let's wrap up there because we are now coming up on 85 minutes, although with cuts it might be smaller. Anyways, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on fatherhood? What are your thoughts on being dads? Harkening back to DLC, if you were to make a game on your dad, what would it be like? And I mean, if you want to speak to your experiences of fatherhood, be they great and wonderful or be they hard and challenging, like we want to hear it. We're open to listening to that. So feel free to reach out to us in any forum, public or private. And Termite can give you the deets on that right now.
We have a website, 80bitpodsmash.com. It's a landing website where you can get all of the links to our show. So we launch a show every midnight on Monday, 12 a.m. We don't ever miss a week. We haven't in almost 3 years. It's fantastic. So you can always make sure that you're caught up on our show by going to 80bitpodsmash.com, where we have links to Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Stitcher. Our RSS feed link is there. You can throw it into any third-party app and get subscribed. Please do that. If you want to get more involved with us in our community, we have our social media networks, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit. They're all 80-Bit Podsmash, so you can add us. You can find Facebook.com, 80-Bit Podsmash, Twitter. They're all 80-BIT Podsmash. We have created a thread on Reddit and started a discussion. We also have a Discord server that we've stood up, and we're monitoring and using and active in that with our community. And the link to our Discord is on all of our social media posts forever and the show notes of every episode, so you can find it there. And we stream on Twitch, so twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, whether it's Daylight Savings or Standard, it's Eastern. We alternate weeks between the two of us, so you can jump in the chat, hang out with us while we play a game. However, whatever facet you want to interact with us, we are there. And we do have a community, and they're awesome. So hit us up.
Cool. All right. Next week, we will be picking up where we left off in our list of the best video games of all time, based on the Wikipedia entry on that very thing. We bit off more than we could chew last week, so we're going to have to do a part 2. So we'll do that next week, and hopefully we'll get through the rest of the list. Who knows? Or maybe part 3. Either way, we'll see you then.
See you next week.